members of the most illustrious fantasy football league. It is I, your commissioner and 1, 2, 3-time undisputed champion, Chasey Callahan, coming at you live from the Commissioner's HQ. I wanted to give a big announcement, really some clarification on where we stand with the playoffs and things like that, and also just say, what a season we're having. It's been utter chaos. I'm wearing my lucky Emmett Smith jersey as I'm heading into a really big matchup against the Hilton Head Whalers, who have also had a roller coaster of a season, a very cool season for Tim. But yeah, the reason I'm giving this announcement is because, in the past, we've had one or two teams that come down to the wire at the end of the season that make it or don't make it based on the last week. I know Mike and I, over the years, it's been like 4 or 5 times where either he's getting in or I'm getting in on the last week of the season. But we've never had 4 teams vying for the last 2 playoff spots in the same division. That is bonkers, bananas. And honestly, it could have been 5. If Champ didn't have so many injuries, if Justin Jefferson wouldn't have gone down, Champ would be right back in the thick of things. And so that is really what I wanted to talk about. We'll kind of open it up the problem. Current league tiebreaker is head-to-head. Everybody knows what that means, right? Individual head-to-head record. Historically, our second tiebreaker has been divisional record, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But what is the third tiebreaker? And we look at the standings here, we see how close this is. It's just wild. Right here is actually like the overall rankings. And so if we didn't have divisions, the playoffs at the end, if the league ended today, the playoffs would be Zach, Mike, Tyler, Chase. So let's move on. Head-to-head record. Since Mike, Tyler, Brett, and Chase are all within 1 game of each other, it is possible that any number of them could have a tied record to end the season. It's not only possible, it's probable that there are some tied records. The remaining teams have split their head-to-head record except for Tyler and Brett. Tyler owns the tiebreaker on Brett. Okay, and right here you see that. They played week 1 and they played week 9, and Tyler took both of those. And so if they do tie, Tyler owns that on Brett. The secondary tiebreaker. So historically, the secondary tiebreaker has been divisional record. Now, this has only come into play one time. And it was one of those years that it was between me and Mike. When considering divisional record, we see that Tyler is leading that tiebreaker, but Mike, Brett, and Chase are still tied, which is crazy. Divisional record won't change after this week, which is important because none of us are playing divisional opponents. We're all playing left cheek opponents, and so divisional record is locked at this point. And so it's going to be overall record that really matters. So the third tiebreaker, there is a variety of numbers we could look at or rankings we could go off of for a third tiebreaker. Some ideas have been thrown out. Total points scored, head-to-head point differential, other rankings within the NFL app, and you can see some of those rankings. This is just the overall rankings, like I mentioned earlier. In the middle, we've got the breakdown, which is like how many more points you scored against, if you would have beat how many more people that week, basically. Hopefully that makes sense. I didn't word it very well. And then the true rankings, which is a collaboration of all of these rankings. So, third tiebreaker, total points scored. Here's kind of where the rubber meets the road. I spoke or exchanged messages with every member of the league to gain their thoughts on what they thought we should do as the third tiebreaker. And it was very unassuming. A lot of them were texts where I went out and said, hey, what are your thoughts? And that's how I started it. What do you think should be the tiebreaker? The overwhelming majority said, unsolicited, like I said, I didn't put any ideas out there, that total points scored makes the most sense as the third tiebreaker. It makes sense because it's a stat that many leagues have as their first tiebreaker. A lot of teams do points scored instead of head-to-head, and it shows your overall production in the year. It's also simple, and you don't need an algorithm to figure out the standings. It means that I don't have to go through and count up crazy numbers to figure out what the actual standings would be. Simplicity is good. So, there's some criticism around that, and I understand that. Like, I'm not here to say that none of the criticism is fair, but I do want to address some of the criticism. One of the criticisms is the commissioner wants total points scored out of bias. And that's probably because out of the 4, I do have the total points, most points scored. But what I'll say to that is, you don't want total points scored out of bias because you don't have as many points. So it's a viable stat that leagues track, and most leagues determine their standings off of. I'm not just throwing out some crazy ranking. Like I could say, let's go off of the true ranking on the NFL app because I'm ranked high in that. No, total points scored is a well-known ranking system that most leagues go off of. And when I reached out to members of the league, I didn't push total points scored. They organically said that should be the tiebreaker because it makes the most sense after head-to-head record. Now, do I have the most points scored? Yes, but who's only 10 points behind me? Tyler. Who's 48 points behind me here? Brett, who has been scoring like 30 to 40 more points than me weekly now. And so nobody is out of this total points scored thing. It's not like I'm pushing it because I'm the runaway guy with this. Tyler might catch me this week. Brett, I know that one's more of an outside shot, but he could catch me too. Now, the commissioner is trying to get his team into the playoffs. If that was the case, I would actually be trying to get rid of the divisional record right now instead of a third tiebreaker that may come into effect. There have been a few league members, in fact, who said we should just do total points scored as the second tiebreaker and not look at divisional record at all after head-to-head. I agree. I think total points scored is a better tiebreaker than divisional record, but there's a precedent that's been set that it should be divisional record, and so we should go by that. I'm not coming in here to say new crazy things and new wild things. I am nothing if I'm not honest and I'm not fair. And the fair and honest thing to do is to go with the precedent that was set, which is divisional record. Now, once again, if I wanted to get my team into the playoffs, I wouldn't even be pushing points scored. I would be pushing things like true rankings or overall ranking because I'm actually crushing it in those stats. But, and I list here, there are other metrics that show I should be in the playoffs, which is true. If you look at those other rankings, the only one that doesn't is the coaching one, which is like the total on your bench versus what you could have played, which I think is a stupid one. But once again, that's why we're not going off of those things because they can be cherry picked. Now, overall, I've made boneheaded choices that could cost my team a shot at the playoffs because of my record. Just like every other team that's in contention. All right, so I have here, if I would have played Brian Robinson this week instead of Josh Kelly, I would have beat Champ. I had some players I could have played and would have beat Mike. It happens. That's why my record's the way it is. But everyone who is still in playoff contention has these stories and feels like their team should be in the playoffs. And I appreciate that. I get that. But the most simple way to determine that without getting a bunch of BS rankings and stuff like that is total points scored. So it's not fair to just throw in a tiebreaker now is another criticism. And I understand that one because I'm a conservative man. I'm not like, hey, let's just throw in a new rule right now that should apply right now. But if we don't put in a tiebreaker now, then when would we? What I mean by that is what happens next week when the games have been played and me, Bert, Tyler, Bert is Brett, Tyler, and Mike are all tied. And then we try to introduce something and it actually becomes almost a popularity contest as far as who we should vote into the league based on our 1 year tiebreaker decision. I don't want that. I want this to be known before we go into this week. Is it more fair to base a tiebreaker off of an actual recognized stat like total points scored that many leagues use to rank teams or tiebreak, or to pick a name out of a hat? We don't want to do that. This is fantasy football. People have spent time doing this. In discussion with a previous league champion, in fact, I found out there actually is a precedent set. And this is very important because we as a league are all about precedents. That's what we've always been about. That's why I understand this criticism about throwing in a tiebreaker now. I get that. I don't like it either, but we have to do it because it's needed. But the answer to that is there's actually precedents that's already been set with total points scored as the third tiebreaker. What do I mean by that? So I was talking with a league champion, actually, going back and forth, just texting. And that league champion was Michael Joseph Carlin. And one of the things he said, he brought up the divisional record thing because I thought I had remembered that we did that. It was like a long time ago. It was like 5+ years ago that we had to do that because of how close things were between him and I. And he said, yes, we did divisional record, but the tiebreaker after divisional record was total points scored. And he said, I say that knowing that I have the least total points scored. So he's being very fair about this and very objective about this. And he said the precedent is there. It's total points scored. And so it kind of, honestly, I got all this out of the way to get to that point because that is the most important point, that there is a precedence there for total points scored. And I have in here, I want to show appreciation to Tim, the proud owner of the Hilton Head Whalers. And the reason I want to show appreciation to Tim is because whenever I talked with Tim, he was one of those people. He didn't say do total points scored instead of divisional record. He wanted to do the precedent, but he was saying we should do total points scored, and if that takes me out of the playoffs, that takes me out of the playoffs. And I was like, whoa, 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 you're in the playoffs, you're safe, you're good. But I want to show some respect to that because we have some very objective members of this league that I really appreciate. And I also want to show appreciation to Tim because Tim joined this league in 2018, and this is the first year in the playoffs for him. So go, Tim, go. I'm rooting for you, big league. What a great season he's had. He's had to pick up some players. I think of Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, to fill holes because of injuries. Jonathan Taylor going down, Cooper Kupp here and there, starting out the season injured. But he has risen above those injuries, and now he's looking strong. And I'm very nervous to play him this week because bottom line, if I lose this week, it doesn't matter, And so moving on. In conclusion, we're going with total points scored for all those reasons and the precedents that's been set. But now let's talk about the playoff outlook. So this is the playoff outlook for the last 4 teams. Mike, Tyler, myself, and Bert. Bert is Brett. So for Mike, win and you're in because he will be still a game above anybody else. But if Mike loses, he needs 2 of Tyler, Chase, and Brett to lose as well. Or he needs to score more points than the people that he has a tied record with because our divisional records are tied. If Tyler wins, he's in as well because he owns the tiebreaker over myself and Bert, divisionally speaking, specifically. Head-to-head, we split, but divisionally speaking, he has a better record. If Tyler loses, he needs 2 of Mike, Brett, and Chase to lose and have more points than 2 teams. That's very confusing. But basically what I'm saying here is he needs to have more points than 2 of the teams that have the same record as him. Now, Chase, I have to win. If I lose, it doesn't matter, really. I have to win, and I need either Tyler or Mike to lose. If that happens, I'm in. Now, Brett needs to win as well. If he loses, he's out. He needs Tyler or Mike to lose, or me to lose. If it's tough to explain. If Tyler or Mike lose and Brett wins and Brett has more points, he's in. If that makes sense, than me. So let's get into this a little bit more. Brett has the same record as Tyler, right? So Brett has to have a game up on Tyler to beat him into the playoffs because Tyler owns that head-to-head record. So he needs Mike or Tyler to lose because if Mike loses, Brett can tie him record-wise, but Brett right now has more points scored and probably will still than Mike, and so he could be in. But then if I win and Tyler wins, Brett needs to have more points scored than me. So it's confusing. Hopefully that makes more sense for you. But that's kind of where we're at. I wanted to give it that announcement and try to clear the air on some stuff. I'm obviously available to chat through any of it. And very excited again because here's another thing that I don't have on here. These games matter this last week for more than just us 4. ZP3, this is interesting. If ZP3 loses to Mike gets the number 1 seed, which means he plays the 4 seed instead of the 3 seed he would play as the 2 team. So very interesting dynamics. What a weird way to end the season if Zach loses and is no longer the number 1 seed. That would be kind of wild. I don't want that to happen because obviously I want Zach to beat Mike so I can get in the playoffs potentially, but wild way to end the season. Like I said, my door's open. If you have any questions, come ask me. Happy to help. Hopefully this clears up the air and gives some context and some information for all of you. And let's move on to the game of the week. USDA Certified Lean. All right, and finally we've got the USDA Certified Lean America's Game of the Week, and he gives it to this right cheek matchup with the left cheek that's going to determine the playoffs. Very excited. What a week we're going to have. What an end to a regular season. I'm excited for my matchup, also really nervous because Tim's got a really good team, and I think he's got a great shot at beating me and just ending my hopes. So, but if it does, tip my cap. What a season for Tim. Once again, excited for him. Excited to see how this plays out. What a fit again to a very fun season. Thank you, everybody, for the camaraderie, being super involved. Playoffs start next week, so I'm excited to see who's in the hunt and what the seeding is going to be. But have a great week, League. Enjoy the game tonight between the Chargers and the Raiders. Hopefully Austin Eckler goes off because I need him badly. I need him very badly to show up for me. Make sure you thank our sponsors, being the Cheeks of Patrick Starr, how tight they are, and finally the Spike Vax by Moderna. Huge shout out to them and the replication of the spike protein giving you heart attacks at a young age, especially for males. So have a great week. Talk to you next time. I wonder if I'll ever brighten up my way.